Hey, what's up guys? In today's video we're going to have a quick look at the performance of NBA 2K24 Arcade Edition across iPhone, iPad, Apple TV and Mac. I want to quickly point out something though. I'm very bad at this game, really bad. I've played all of these arcade versions of NBA, but I still suck. So keep that in mind. This video is also not going over any of the new content, it's simply about performance, a quick glance, so just keep that in mind before you go into this video. Okay, enjoy. Alrighty, let's start with iPad. I just want to quickly point out that 2K provided me with a test flight build of this game, which has allowed me to enable the performance HUD. You have to do this using Xcode and the developer mode on iOS if you want to use the performance HUD. Here is my iPad Pro 12.9 inch with an Apple M2 GPU. This iPad by default will run the game at max settings, which is ultra high for everything. It's wonderful. The game looks pretty good in this state, if I must say. Basically, the frame rate is a locked 59.97. I don't know why it's locked to that. I don't know why it doesn't go to 60 and it's stuck there, but it's basically 60. The one thing that I want to mention with this game, and you'll see this repeatedly, is that it's 60 during just normal basketball gameplay, and then when the camera goes up close to the players, or whatever you want to call that, it drops down to 30 frames. This has been the same case with every NBA 2K game on Apple Arcade since 2021. I don't know why this happens. If anyone knows, let me know in the comments. Anyways, there's not really that much to say about this device. It runs the game very well. It's locked to its target frame rates, basically 60 and 30, and ultra high. It looks really good here. Moving on, we have my iPad Pro 11 inch from 2021. This is an Apple M1 version. Now, once again, this one has pretty much exactly the same performance as Apple M2. This game doesn't really push it that much, if I'm honest. It's not the most demanding title out there. Now, this game by default will play at ultra high on Apple M1 as well, which is wonderful. And it will have a target FPS in this version of about 59.98, which is weird. I don't know why it's targeting that frame rate. And also it is 30 again during camera shots or cinematics or whatever you want to call it. And it runs exactly the same as Apple M2, so if you've got this one, it runs fine. With both of these devices, I didn't really notice any thermal throttling. I played on both of these iPad Pros for about 40 minutes each, and it never really throttled, and that's really good to see. Our last iPad to look at in my possession is the iPad 10th Gen from 2022. This device has an Apple A14 GPU, which isn't terribly powerful, but it can get the job done for most titles. With this game, it plays at high settings by default. However, you can raise up the graphics to ultra, but first let's have a look and see how the game does at high graphics. It's basically a locked 60 FPS here, which is very good. There isn't a massive difference between ultra high and high graphics with this game. Jerseys are still easy to read and so forth, and shadows are pretty good still. When playing in this state, the device didn't really throttle. I played for maybe 20 minutes and it just stayed at 60 and it's 30 FPS targets, and that's awesome. I did, however, try the game at max graphics, ultra high, and this is where it started to have some problems. It would never be a locked 60 FPS, it would be about 40 to 60 FPS. It had its issues. Are you going to notice it if you're playing on this device? If you are looking for it, yes, you will see it, but if you're not really one of those people that looks for frame rates, then you may not, but everyone here probably is, so you will probably notice it. And this iPad has a pretty large display, so you probably honestly may notice the slowdowns, but as we're going to see, it's nowhere near as bad as iPhone. Oh boy. Now it's time to look at iPhone. I've got a few of these devices, so that's good. We can have a look at how this game goes. Right now we have the iPhone 15 Pro, which has the Apple A17 Pro GPU. By default, this game will play at ultra high graphics, max settings, and it really shouldn't, which will be a common theme with these devices, iPhones. The thing is, it will be 60 frames for, 5 to 10 minutes, and then the device just gets so hot. It burns to touch. It's so hot. It went up to and sometimes over 50 degrees when playing this game. Very hot. So, in my opinion, I just don't recommend playing this game at ultra high settings. So what you want to do is play at high settings. You are playing at a bit lower settings, but because this iPhones have a pretty small display, I don't think you're really going to notice it unless you put this into plug this into a monitor and play it that way. Possibly you may notice, but I don't know. As I said earlier, there's not a huge difference between high and ultra high, so you're going to be okay. Up next, we have iPhone 14 Pro, which has an Apple A16 GPU. And once again, this device plays at ultra high settings by default, and again, it shouldn't because it thermal throttles. It's hard to say if it's worse than the iPhone 15 Pro. I could notice that it would get up to maybe 47 degrees. It was a little bit cooler. It's just sometimes the frame rate would go down super low into the 30s. And then I'd jump into a different game and it wouldn't be as bad. So it's hard to compare it to the iPhone 15 Pro, but I think it does have slightly better thermal management, which is weird. So what you want to do, again, unfortunately, is play at high settings with everything on high. And you want a locked 60 FPS. I also have an iPhone 14 Plus. This one has an Apple A15 GPU, and by default it will play at ultra high graphics. I will say this device actually has quite a bit better thermal management than the iPhone 14 Pro and even the iPhone 15 Pro. These Plus models do quite well because they're a bit larger. But yeah, it took longer for this device to get really hot. It got up to about, for me, 41 degrees. It wasn't until about maybe 15 minutes into the game where it started to notice some slowdowns. So if you don't want your device to get as hot and you want a locked 60 FPS, then once again you're going to have to play at high settings, folks. Now we're going to jump back quite a bit further into the past with an iPhone XR, which has an Apple A12 GPU. This GPU is pretty old now, let's be honest, but it can still hold its weight all these years later, because for some reason it didn't get that hot. It got up to, let's see, 38 degrees. It didn't really go below 60 FPS, which is strange because it's playing at mostly medium settings here, which probably does help to some degree. You can't actually go above these settings. You have to play at medium. You can lower them, but you can't go higher. So this is probably one of the reasons for it running much better. But also, the older GPU still is able to handle this performance and reach that 60 FPS target. So I'm really impressed actually with this device, but it's also running at a lower resolution too. So there are a lot of factors to consider with this device. The one annoying thing with this game being at medium settings though is that it doesn't look great, and jerseys are very hard to read, and there are body parts missing for people in the stadium. It's quite funny. I had a bit of a chuckle, but it's a bit it's a bit distracting, if I can say so. Our last device to look at is the iPhone 8 Plus. This one has an Apple A11 GPU. By default, this game plays at the same settings that the iPhone XR did, which was about medium for everything. And you also can't go any higher than medium settings, similar to the iPhone XR. Unfortunately, it doesn't really, throttle. It's just that the GPU can't keep up with this performance here, so it's not a locked 60 FPS. It will drop down quite often in the default graphics that this phone comes with for the game, going down into the low 50s all the time. It's sometimes even into the low 40s. Even at the lowest settings, it's not a locked 60 FPS on iPhone 8 Plus. The performance is a little bit better overall, sure, but I don't really suggest this because the game doesn't look very good and there's like no one in the crowds or no one in the stadium, and jerseys are very difficult to read and player models look disgusting. Personally, I think medium settings for this game is what you want to do, even though you're going to have frame rate drops. It's really your best option. This game is also on Apple TV, as all the original games are on Apple TV as well. I have to note I'm not using the performance HUD for the Apple TV version, as 2K didn't provide me with a test flight version, so instead I'm using external frame rate capture software, but the results still should be fairly accurate. This device you're looking at here is the Apple TV 4K 3rd Gen, which has the A15 GPU. So by default, this game will play at high settings, but you can actually raise them up to ultra high. But first, let's have a look at and see how the game does at high settings. So when you first boot up the game, it will be 60 FPS for quite a while actually, maybe like 20 or so minutes. And then if you play the game for quite a while, this device is going to get so hot because it has no fan. The other Apple TVs do, this one doesn't. It gets up to, I was seeing 56 degrees at these settings, which was so hot. And it would basically become unplayable for quite a duration of the gameplay, and then it would come good, and then it would get really hot, and then it would drop, and then it would go back, and it just wasn't ideal. And that was at high settings, so if you went up to ultra high, it's really bad. It's never 60 FPS. It's often way down to 30 frames, and then even lower than that. This device desperately needed a fan for gaming. It was a terrible, terrible decision for Apple not to include a fan. I know a lot of people don't really play games on this device, but it's just not good. And our last device to look at is my 13-inch MacBook Pro from 2020, which has an Apple M1 chip. What's interesting to note about the Mac version is that it's quite a bit better frame rate wise than the iOS version. It can play up to whatever your computer's refresh rate is. So for me, I'm playing on an external monitor here that has 120 Hz support, and it will go up to that. And it also doesn't have a 30 FPS cap for those cinematics or camera shots. The one annoying thing though is that it has a max resolution of 1080p. You can't go above that, it's just really annoying because why can't I go above that? Make the game look even better. By default on Apple Silicon, the game will play at ultra high, at 1080p ultra high. So it's basically playing the game at max graphics, and this is the weakest Apple Silicon chip, no issues. So anything above this is going to be fine, so I didn't bother showing anything else. This isn't a very demanding game, especially on Mac, so it can fly by. It is fine. And there we have it. NBA 2K24 arcade edition across a wide range of Apple devices. The port is interesting. It's not the most graphically demanding game, so it runs fine on iPad, it runs great on Mac, it runs okay on Apple TV, apart from the new model with the thermal issues because it has no fan, and the iPhone version has a lot of issues because of thermal throttling. But overall, it's okay, and most will enjoy this game and what it has to offer. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I need to go now because it's really hot here in Australia right now. It's like getting really hot and I'm sweating, so I'll see you later. My next video might be on Fort Zolus on Mac, or definitely Resident Evil Village on iPhone and iPad, so keep a lookout for that. I'm really excited for those games to come out. Alright, see ya!